Today's video is sponsored by Squarespace. So I'm still kind of dialing things in here at the new office space and figuring out what works best and rearranging things all over the room as I do pretty much all the time. But I'm trying to get things figured out and dialed in, as well as just, this next chapter of the YouTube channel. I've been kind of changing things and experimenting with different video ideas, as well as the audio in here as well. I know that there's an echo in here and I'm trying to figure out the best way to record sound, and there's just a lot of kind of experimenting going on, but I thought today we could take a look at some photos and maybe start something new. Before Archives became sort of like a Q&A style podcast, it was originally me going back through the archives and looking at older photos and telling some stories about the photos or critiquing the photos, talking about what works and what doesn't work. And I kind of want to do that now, but with current photos. Every week or every 2 weeks I can share some photos that I made that week and just kind of talk about them. Or if it's on film and it's not from that particular week, maybe just as I get new film scans in from the darkroom, I can talk about them as I receive them, maybe give some kind of first impressions of the film scans or anything. I'm not really sure. I gathered a bunch of photos over the last couple of months though, some that I've posted on Instagram and talked about, others that I haven't shared anywhere, so I thought it would be fun to kind of dive into these and critique them a little bit. So this is the start of a new little series that I like to call some recent photographs that I made recently with my camera. They're not the best, but I like them. That's a working title. Again, I'm figuring things out here. The very first photo is of Buzz. This is my neighbor. He has been my neighbor pretty much my entire life, outside of just a couple years after high school, where I lived in town. I've lived in the same house. The house that my wife and kids, we all live in, is the house that I grew up in with my brother and my parents. And Buzz has lived there my entire life, next door. And I've spent a lot of time in this particular kind of point of view where I'm standing there at the fence line talking to Buzz. I shot this back in the spring, when the whole lockdown kind of started, so we were in the backyard constantly. And I was sitting there talking to Buzz, or standing there talking to Buzz, and as we were talking, it just kind of hit me that, one day I'm not going to be having these same kind of similar conversations that I've had my entire life. I used to watch my dad stand along the fence there talking to Buzz, and now as my kids are playing in the yard, I do the same thing, which is just a cool thing. It's not something that people experience all the time living in the same house for so many years. So while I still have that kind of time talking to Buzz, I figured I would go ahead and shoot a photo, especially for his family's sake. Knowing Buzz, I'm sure there aren't a ton of photos of him out there, so I wanted to go ahead and make sure I had a photo, not only for my sake, but for his family as well as years go on and once he's, long gone. Sounds really morbid to say things like that, but that's a big part of why I take photos of people in my life, is to preserve those kind of things. So, but yeah, I shot this with the M6 HP5, and I believe I shot this with the Sumerit. I don't think I shot this after I went back to the Summicron, but either way, 35 HP5, pretty much the standard. Completely switching gears, this was just a quick photo that didn't really belong anywhere. It's very different from all of my other photos that I shoot. I shot this with the SL2 and 24-70, which is the exact combo I'm using to film this video, but it was just Elliot in the living room of our house. There was a little butterfly on the outside of the window, and Elliot, just being the kind soul that he is, any little bug, any animal, he just talks to them like they are his best friend, and he was just sitting there talking to this butterfly that was out in front of the window, and I just wanted to shoot something completely different for me, and I shot this. I feel like I'm more open to this kind of experimenting and just trying things completely different and shooting outside of how I normally shoot now that I have a digital camera that I'm using more frequently. Still shooting a lot of film, but having that there to kind of open up some possibilities and freedom to just try things and not have to worry about, a bunch of wasted film. It's kind of nice. That, I think, for me is the biggest thing I've really enjoyed about shooting digital, is just trying different things out and letting myself experiment a little bit more. Also with the SL2 and 24-70, this is Sunburger. This is a restaurant in Chillicothe that just recently announced they were closing. It's an old school drive-in type diner, think Sonic, but this is just, an individual Chillicothe owned and operated business. But they just announced recently that they were closing this original location. They have a second location on the other side of town, but this is the original location that was opened in the 50s. And it's just sort of a Chillicothe staple. Everyone around here has memories of going to Sunburger. I know I did when I was a kid. Me and my family used to go there all the time. And the way the layout of the building was and all the new kind of guidelines, I think they just realized that it wasn't going to fit, whereas the newer location, they're just going to kind of stay there, and they're able to kind of operate under the new guidelines with, you know, the pandemic. But this is such a special location and kind of iconic building in Chillicothe. So before it gets either demolished or remodeled into something else, I wanted to go there and get some photos of the place before anything was changed. So I shot this just a day after they announced that they were closing, so I wanted to get in there early before anything changed. I shot a number of different photos, but this was definitely my favorite one of the building itself, having the sign there, kind of framing inside of another sign. You can see kind of along the edge of the frame, I tried to kind of fit everything in there using these signs and posts almost as like a frame itself. I also like this one here with this reflection where it said shakes in the window. Sunburger was very well known for their shakes as well, so I tried to just come up with some different compositions and including different details. I really wanted to be able to shoot inside there, but unfortunately I was just stuck with shooting outside. But right as we were about to leave, an SUV pulled up, and it was two women inside the SUV, and they rolled the window down and they said, you know, they asked if it was closing, and I told them yes and why I was there taking photos before anything changed. And there was an older woman named Catherine in the passenger seat, and she said, "Would you take my picture out there? I used to come here all the time when I was a kid." And I was like, yeah, absolutely, that's amazing. So Catherine stepped out, and I kind of walked her up over in front of the sign there. She was, you know, on a cane and everything. I just had her standing there close to the sign. I didn't want to shoot anything too tight. I really wanted to show the whole building and everything with her standing there. And I shot this one photo of her there, and I got all of her information from, I believe, her daughter who was driving the car, and sent him a copy of the photo later that night, and it made her day, and it was really sweet. She offered to, you know, pay me for the photo, and I kept telling her no. I mean, that's the kind of stuff that I love about small town photography in general, is being able to take a photo of her in front of this building that she has so many memories of with her family. It's just the best. It was like the highlight of the entire week. Here's a random photo that I'm not really all that happy with. I love taking photos of dogs, but I very rarely take photos of fake dogs. But as I was walking into Kroger to get groceries, I saw someone's truck. They had even the window rolled down for the little guy. This fake Dalmatian just sitting there taking in the sunlight and the fresh air. No idea what this was doing there. I just happened to stop and shoot a photo really quick. I'm not all that happy with the photo. It's nothing that I'm like super excited about, but sometimes I will stop and take a photo knowing it's not something that I'm gonna frame or publish or share or anything, but it's more for the sake of sharing it this way, just, you know, random things that you see, random stories. Back to the M6 and some HP5. This is a recent photo I made of my mom, and probably one of my favorites I've ever made of her. Her just sitting there at the kitchen counter, just relaxing. We were just sitting there talking, and I happened to just pull the camera up, and she glanced over and saw me, and that's when she started to laugh there, and that looks like her to me. She doesn't have her guard up as if I was like taking a headshot of her, you know, it's just her in her house, just being herself, and those are always the best photos and the best kind of portraits. But I wanted to share this one as well because a lot of you have been asking about her. In a recent episode of Archives, I shared that her stage 4 cancer had returned and that she had started a new treatment about 4 months ago. She just recently got a really good scan. The doctor was thrilled, said that the cancer had stopped spreading any further, which is kind of the goal, and they've also seen improvement in some of the areas as well as a result of the treatment. So things are going good. It is stage 4, but any good news like that, we will take it. So just wanted to share that with you guys who were asking. On that same roll was this photo of her playing with the kids, Nora there in her laugh as she's laughing and tickling her, and Elliot there in the foreground looking back at me. Taking photos of my kids is awesome. Taking photos of my kids with my mom is just a completely different feeling. Those of you who have kids who do a similar thing, I'm sure you get it. It's just a really, really special thing to have these photos. More M6 and HP5 in the backyard. This is Nora just running through the backyard, head to toe, covered in mud. That is her 24/7. And just this kind of, the tilted frame and her running, there's just a lot of chaos going on, which perfectly sums up our backyard, and I love it. Nora is always sensory seeking. Any kind of mud or water or sand or dirt, anything like that, she just gravitates to. So pretty much all the time in the backyard, she is just filthy, her hair's a mess, and that is my favorite way to shoot photos of her because that's just her being her. Like this photo right here, she had drug the hose all the way across the yard and turned the water on to basically flood this little slab of pavement. You can kind of see the reflection there in the background, but she was laying down and basically pressing her cheek into that water on the pavement and looking at all of the light as it was kind of bouncing off the water there. And for her being on the spectrum and noticing and gravitating towards little things like that has been one of the most fascinating things as a photographer, and like watching her and seeing what catches her eye. You know, we're constantly as photographers looking for little things and noticing things that maybe other people don't. And Nora in her own way kind of does the same thing. And so I'm always looking at that and trying to photograph that in a different way. And for this photo here, I loved the subtle reflection there, like I said, but also just kind of shooting over top and kind of pointed down with part of the hose kind of coming through the frame there and this sort of right angle of the pavement there. It just made for a photo that right off the bat, you don't know exactly what's going on. This photo of Elliot with his goose egg on his head. One of my best friends growing up, Bailey, she has become best friends with my wife, and our kids are always playing together, and Bailey and Molly are always getting together. So I've been shooting a lot of photos of like all of our families together, which has been fun, but Elliot was chasing her son Tyson around, or I think it was the other way around. I think Elliot was being chased in the backyard by Tyson. And then Elliot was kind of running and was looking back, and he tripped over into the fire pit. Luckily, there was no fire going on at the time, but it's just a big steel drum, basically, for the fire pit. And so he tripped, went into it, and ended up hitting his head on the other side of the fire pit. How he didn't bust his head open, I have no idea, because it just swelled up immediately. And so we took him inside, Molly gave him a bath. He had all of this just black ash and everything all over him from landing in the fire pit. Again, thank God the fire wasn't going, but we got him inside, got him cleaned up, and he was just kind of standing there shivering, and he was happy at this point. He was totally fine, but I wanted to take a photo of the goose egg because it had just swelled up so much. And he just kind of walked over. I was like, let me just get a photo of you over here in front of this wall. And he walked over there and was just kind of shivering, and the light from the lamp and everything, it really just highlighted that goose egg like perfectly. Yeah, one of those moments where I pick the camera up even when it's not really a happy moment. Sometimes I think it's important to document everything, not just, you know, the laughs and the smiles and this or that. Life isn't all laughs and smiles, and I want to be able to show that in like honest, real photos. I think a large part of why I think to do stuff like that is because of Sally Mann, and as I was taking this photo, I instantly thought of the photo she made of her daughter after she had been stung by a bee, like right under the eye, and it swelled up really big. That was like immediately like pictured in my head, and so this was sort of like my own little nod to that. Earlier that night, while we had everybody over, we had this little kiddie pool and a sprinkler out in the backyard, and I was trying to get photos of Nora as she was backlit there with all the light hitting the sprinklers, and I had stopped the lens down to maybe 5.6 or f8 and was just kind of zone focusing basically. I was shooting all of this with the 50mm. Now in hindsight, I wish I would have shot these maybe wide open just to get a lot more separation between the water and the grass in the background. Over here on this side, you can see that the water just kind of blends in with all the highlights on the grass, and I think this just would have looked a lot better if it had a more shallow depth of field. Again, with black and white, I kind of talked about this in a recent video of shooting black and white with intention. When you're layering things like that and you're trying to kind of envision things in black and white, knowing that the water and the grass behind it isn't going to be separated by color, it's only going to be separated by the difference in light. I definitely should have thought about that, and I should have known that that would blend in together. So this photo doesn't work as well as I would have liked. I just liked her kind of moving through the frame, mostly being silhouetted by the light there and shooting in really hard light at the end of the day. Like this photo here of Elliot just being Elliot with the sprinkler there. This works a lot better because of that separation from the depth of field. So had I done something similar to that in the previous photo, it probably just would have worked a lot better. And last but not least, some photos of the kids in the backyard. Late at night, we were only using basically these tiny little string lights on our back deck there, and that was really the only light source outside of a big light post that's, you know, a couple yards over. I wanted to just shoot some photos of the kids with this sort of black, open and empty kind of scene behind them, and it was really low light. I think this was ISO 6400 f2 at like a 15th or a 30th of a second on the M10P there. As they got closer, I was able to speed it up to maybe a 60th, but way off in the distance in the yard. I wanted to, one, obviously give them enough light so that you could see them, but I really wanted to get photos of them running and playing together with this sort of motion blur. Again, really dark with a little bit of motion blur, just to give it a little bit of a different look than what I typically shoot in broad daylight. And seeing the two of them playing together is just another thing I'm really drawn to shooting, because with Nora, we never knew if she would get to that point where she would be actually engaging with Elliot and playing with Elliot. He's such a social kid and wants to play with her 24/7, and he's really had to kind of bring that out of her because she's totally content playing by herself and doing her own thing, whereas he's always looking for that interaction. So it's just awesome to see them playing together and just see a totally different side of her. Another little nod to Sally Mann as Nora had her hand on her hip right there. That was like what drew me to shoot that photo, and I shared a whole set of these on Instagram and someone commented on that. So I was glad to see someone else notice the same thing, because as soon as she had that hand on her hip, I thought of that like iconic photo of Sally Mann's of her daughter with the fake cigarette. And finally, I handed the M10 off to Molly that night and had her shoot a couple photos of me with the kids on the back porch there. She actually shot this with the rangefinder, so Molly is improving on that. But I just wanted to get a couple photos of me with the kids, because I do prefer to be the one to document everything and to make photos of Molly with the kids and just the kids themselves. And I know that one day the kids will look back at their childhood and I'm sure they'll be thinking, oh yeah, Dad with his cameras, like that's just what he was always doing. And I never want them to think that I wasn't present while I was there, or that they were just subjects to me. I never want that to be, you know, what their memory is, or what they see when they look back at photos. I don't want them to just see a bunch of photos of them and Mom and not any photos with me as well. And just being conscious and being aware of that is something that is really important to me, and making sure that I am still being present and I still am just being their dad. I'm not just, you know, the guy with the camera. So that's something that a lot of people have actually asked me about, and I'm doing a whole video about that will be up next week. So stay tuned for that one, but it's just a subject that is very near and dear to my heart, and I have a lot of feelings about it. So yeah, we'll get more into that next week. But those are just some recent photos that I've made that I thought would be fun to share. I'm always sharing just new photos like this on Instagram, and I kind of treat Instagram like this just ongoing kind of journal entry, you know, where I'm sharing new photos and new things that I happen to stumble across, and I don't really treat it like a portfolio, you know, like some people do. And I'd kind of like to be able to do a similar thing here on the YouTube channel as well, where I just break down recent photos, you know. I'm much more interested in just the why we take photos and just real, everyday, practical experience in photography. If I'm talking to any other photographers, this is the kind of stuff I love to talk about. You know, what it is that drew us to make the photo, what we would have changed in hindsight. That kind of stuff to me is way more interesting than, you know, taking a look at a film stock or the bokeh of a certain lens. If you're into that kind of thing, that's totally fine, but for my channel, I really just want to focus more on the intention behind photography in everyday life. So I hope you do enjoy this kind of format. This is something that I'd like to do on a regular basis, so if you are interested in that, please let me know down below. And before we wrap up, I want to take a minute to pay some bills and thank our sponsor today, which is Squarespace. You guys have heard me talk about Squarespace many times. They are the best all-in-one platform to building a great looking website. You don't need a ton of experience to get started. Anybody can build a website using Squarespace's platform, and they have so many different themes and templates to choose from, but everything is really easy to customize, so you can kind of fine-tune things to fit your style. Whether you just want a gallery to showcase your work, maybe start a blog, or sell products through the built-in commerce feature, anything you would possibly need in a website, it's there available at Squarespace. And if you ever have issues or need help with anything, they have 24/7 award-winning customer service. So if you want to try Squarespace out, head over to squarespace.com for a free trial. But when you want to get signed up, save 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain by going to squarespace.com/mattday. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. I really appreciate it. I hope you're all doing well. Again, if you want to see more videos like this where I just break down some recent photos, let me know in the comments down below. That's it for today. I love you guys. I'll see you next time.